Hello YouTube, Bane666 here. So let's continue with part 2 of my response to Garrett. So without any further delay, let's get stuck into it. Oh, and I'll try not to make this one as long as the last one. No promises though, we'll just see how we go.
Hello, bit of a different video for me this week. Usually I pick a topic and spend a while researching it, writing it, and then quite a few days just refining my writing, doing additional research. But this one's off the cuff. It's a reaction to some things I was seeing on Twitter today. It was a story about a men's rights group or groups that were trying to hire out an auditorium or conference hall or something that belonged to Amnesty International. Now Amnesty, after they received this request, looked into the men's rights movement and didn't like what they saw.
Looked into. So how do we define looked into? Where exactly did they look? Did they actually go to men's rights web pages and see what we actually say? Or did they just rely on the feminist media, which has been known to, how shall I put it, fucking lie about us constantly? They may have also been concerned about a backlash from said feminist media and feminists in general. But let's continue.
Didn't think that what they saw reflected their own goals as a human rights organization, specifically to do with all the anti-feminist stuff that's rife within the men's rights movement. I got into an argument, discussion, debate type thing with a men's rights activist on Twitter about this story. And what I was really trying to say to him, and Twitter's not the greatest format for nuanced discussion and, in-depth back and forth.
Which is exactly why I refuse to use it. But let's continue.
But what I was trying to get across was that all this anti-feminist stuff within the men's rights movement hurts the really genuine activism that takes place within the men's rights movement. Because the thing is, it puts people off.
Garrett, that is a very, very good point, and it's exactly what I've been saying about feminism for a long time now. All this anti-male stuff, like the whole toxic masculinity bullshit. That really puts people off feminism. I mean, there are actual good feminists who just believe in the advocacy for the rights of women. I don't have a problem with that. But then you get all this toxic anti-male bullshit put on top of it. All the poisonous ideology like patriarchy theory and rape culture and toxic masculinity as commonly defined by feminists, which is all about demonizing males and masculinity. And so much time is taken up by this bullshit as opposed to actually advocating for proper women's issues. I can't help but think this is what puts a lot of people off feminism. In fact, I know it is because that's what people commonly say. It's interesting that you point this out to us but seem blind to it within your own movement. And the interesting thing is if this poisonous feminist ideology wasn't around, if this anti-male bullshit which wasn't around, there would be a hell of a lot less anti-feminists. If feminism just focused on actual women's issues without all the male hate thrown in, and also didn't try to stop us from dealing with actual issues which affect men every day, and they were just actually fighting for proper women's issues, advocating for women's issues, I wouldn't have a problem with feminism. And I'd probably be very, very critical of anti-feminists, because you could conclude that they would be against women's rights, right? As opposed to all the toxic bullshit which is associated with feminists, instead of the actual poisonous ideology which is its cornerstone. But anyway, let's continue.
I'm not just talking about feminists, I'm talking about neutral people. I've talked to plenty of people who aren't feminists who totally dislike the men's rights movement because of all the, anti-feminist, misogynistic stuff that's in there.
Anti-feminist, misogynistic stuff that's in there. So, are you suggesting that being anti-feminist is somehow being anti-woman? Because this is an argument I commonly hear, and unfortunately it's absolute bullshit. So let me clarify my position. I am not anti-woman. nor am I anti-women's rights. I actually support any group that actually advocates for the rights of women. There's nothing wrong with a gender-based group which is advocating for a particular need of that group. I think this is perfectly reasonable. What I am anti, though, is feminist ideology. I could go around calling myself someone who is anti-feminist ideology, but it's a little bit of a mouthful. And considering mainstream feminism is full of the ideology which I'm against, and in fact that ideology has become the very cornerstone of modern mainstream feminism, it's much simpler just to refer to myself as an anti-feminist. Once again, this does not mean that I'm anti-woman or anti-women's rights. It simply means I don't agree with feminist ideology, and in fact I find it very offensive, much of it anyway. And I'm talking about this ideology as commonly defined by feminists. Let me stress that. I find things like toxic masculinity and patriarchy theory and rape culture as commonly defined by mainstream feminists to be very offensive and anti-male, and in many cases actually against women's rights. I find a lot of this stuff to actually be misogynistic, believe it or not. In many cases it infantilizes women, it reduces them to helpless objects who are only acted upon with no agency or responsibility of their own. And as someone who actually believes in the rights of women, I do find this offensive. And as a male who is advocating for the rights of men, I find the constant demonization of males and masculinity also offensive. It's for these reasons that I am an anti-feminist. Not because I hate women, because I don't. Not because I'm against women's rights, because I'm not. But because I find the very cornerstone of feminism offensive. The ideology, which is that cornerstone, to be offensive. It's really that simple. Now, you or others may try to twist this into anti-women or against women's rights, wanting to take away the vote or put women back in the kitchen or whatever other bullshit that we constantly hear. But all that is just a distraction. All that is a sleight of hand trick to try to deflect from the fact that there is a problem with mainstream feminist ideology, the very cornerstone of modern mainstream feminism. But let's continue.
I think one of the most interesting situations is when one neutral person who does know about the men's rights movement is telling another neutral person who doesn't know about it, because there are a lot of people still, even online, who've never heard of MRAs and the men's rights movement. Person A will bring the existence of the movement up, and then person B will be like, that's weird. They don't really understand why it exists necessarily, what the issues are, that they don't really understand the justification for it. And then person B, the next thing they say should be about the issues, but that's not what they bring up first. The first thing they tend to bring up is the whole hateful, bigoted side of it, because that's what sticks in people's minds.
And why exactly do you think that is, Garrett? Do you think it's because they've been around reading MRA sites and watching MRA videos? Or do you think they've just been spoon-fed bullshit by feminist media who constantly falsely associates non-MRAs with men's rights activism? Constantly does it. I mean, I wish I had $1 for every fucking time I've heard someone say that men's rights activists were trying to legalise rape on private property. That came from Roosh, who is not an MRA. He's actually against the men's rights movement. He's stated so many times. But that is constantly falsely associated with us because of feminists in the media. Or what about that other little gem? Those MRA losers were boycotting Mad Max. And this came from one individual who wrote an article for a pickup artist site. Who was the guy who wrote the article was expressing his own opinion, and he's not an MRA. He's not part of the movement. Yet that was associated with every single MRA somehow. And we constantly hear that. Or what about the article on Addicting Info which claimed that men's rights activists, note the plural, right, activists, it's got an S on the end, that men's rights activists were celebrating the murder of a female student. And when you actually click on the citation, it takes you to a single person who is not an MRA, who is an anti-feminist, who is expressing his own opinion and not speaking for us. Right? He's got nothing to do with the men's rights movement. Yet, somehow this is all men's rights activists doing it. And if you actually read his post, it's not as bad as the article makes out. But that's an argument for another day. How is it men's rights activists, plural, when there's one person on fucking Tumblr doing it who's not a fucking MRA? What about Elliot Rodger? Constantly quoted as being an MRA. It's bullshit. It's all fucking bullshit. Oh, what about this wonderful, wonderful quote from a feminist journalist, I use that term very loosely, feminist journalist Laurie Penny on Twitter, where she claims that men's rights activist leaders, once again, note the plural, leaders, are actually calling for women to be killed. And of course the link goes to We Hunted the Mammoth, which is just which is always cited by feminists constantly. And if you actually read the article is about one individual, one Peter Andrew Nolan copyrighted, who has publicly stated numerous times he is not an MRA. He has actively spoken out against us, and we have constantly disassociated ourselves with him, constantly referred to him as a lunatic who we want nothing to do with. So the opinion of this one lunatic who has nothing to fucking do with us is apparently men's rights leaders. Once again, note the fucking plural. And the funny thing is about this, right? Laurie Penny, let me stress once again, Laurie Penny is meant to be a journalist. You would expect a journalist to actually research something, right? And to know what they're talking about before expressing their opinion. I know in modern day journalism that is asking way too much. But that's what we should be expecting, right? So in this other tweet, she refers to Peter Andrew Nolan, copyrighted, as Paul Nolan. Now, I have to wonder if she's got Peter Andrew Nolan mixed up with Paul Elam. Fantastic research there, Laurie. Fantastic. Absolutely top-notch research there. Absolutely amazing. You're an inspiration to everyone, everywhere. And I could go on all day quoting this shit to you, Garrett. In fact, my video series, The Propaganda of Toxic Feminism, my last episode was number 46. They average about an hour long each. There's a couple of episodes that go close to 2 hours. So, I don't know, there's probably about 47 to 48 hours worth of material. The vast majority of which is this bullshit. False associations, outright lies, distortion of actual facts. So when you have this propaganda machine, and I don't know what else to call it but a fucking propaganda machine working against us, what do you expect but for some people in the middle to have negative opinions of us, when they've been spoon-fed fucking bullshit for years? I'd love you to answer that question, mate. When mainstream feminist media, right, the feminists in mainstream media constantly put out this bullshit, this constant stream of absolute fucking bullshit and lies about us, how do you expect people not to think bad shit about us? And the fact that they're either so incompetent that they do this, or that they knowingly lie and do this, would suggest that they really don't have proper arguments against us. When you have to resort to this type of bullshit, this level of dishonesty, you can't really have a good argument to rely on. Otherwise, you would be using that. And falsely associating non-MRAs with the men's rights movement is one of their favourite tactics. It's something which is constantly used against us. And the funny thing is, Garrett, you even do exactly that same thing in this very video that I'm responding to. But we'll get to that a bit later.
And not just feminist and neutral people, but men's rights people as well. There are people who want to champion men's rights issues, but they don't want to be part of the men's rights movement because the MRA label has become so toxic.
Isn't it funny that that very same argument has been used against feminism for years? Jeez, I wonder why that is. It just must be the misogynists, right? It's not that there is a problem with feminism. No, of course not. No, couldn't possibly be that. No. No, it's just misogyny, isn't it? Even when women disagree with feminism and think it's bullshit, then that's internalized misogyny then, isn't it? It couldn't possibly be that they have an actual issue with the ideology behind it. Of course not. Of course not.
The MRA brand is just poisonous now.
No, Garrett. Not poisonous. Poisoned. There's a difference. Yes, our brand has been poisoned by your side, by spreading lies about us, by constantly using false associations, misinformation, and fucking outright lies. Constantly. But you know what, Garrett? Those people in the middle ground that you were talking about, when it's shown to them that they've been lied to by people on your side, by the mainstream in your side, I'm not talking about some 14-year-olds on Tumblr. I'm talking about the fucking media here. When it's pointed out to them that they've been lied to by people on your side, that's when they get pissed off. That's when they start to turn their back on feminism and start moving over to our side. And that's happening more and more all the fucking time. Yeah, sure, lying about us and poisoning our brand is a short-term gain for feminism, but it's definitely a fucking long-term loss. And you know what? I'm here to shine a very, very fucking bright spotlight on all that bullshit. I'm here to expose it. And you know what? I'm not going anywhere. And there's more and more people like me every fucking day. So get used to it. And maybe get your own side in line. I've got no problem with legitimate criticism, but I'm not going to sit back and take fucking bullshit and lies.
And that's really what I want to talk about with this video. One of the biggest issues I have with the men's rights movement is the way they talk about the genuine negative interactions they've had with problematic people who operate under the banner of feminism.
So you mean the feminists on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Tumblr, on the internet in general, in the media, in the universities, the ones who influence government. Are those the feminists that you mean there, Garrett? Is that the group of feminists that you're talking about? The ones who constantly dismiss men's issues and demonise masculinity and males? Is that the group that you're talking about, Garrett?
If you look at things like the University of Toronto MRA conference meeting, whatever, that got disrupted and derailed by people blocking doors and pulling fire alarms, those people were radfems. Mainstream feminists dislike radfems just as much as anyone else.
You know, I'm going to accuse Garrett of something here. I think Garrett is a manspreader. You remember manspreading? You know, where men get on trains and they sit with their legs as far apart as possible. We're informed that men do this to oppress women somehow by, you know, dominating them on train seats or some fucking bullshit like that. But I don't think Garrett is doing it because he's a domineering shitlord who wants to oppress women. I think Garrett is a manspreader because it's a biological thing. He really has no choice but to be a manspreader. Because to be perfectly honest with you, Garrett must have the biggest set of fucking balls in the history of mankind to be making this argument. Seriously, Garrett. When we consider that the main argument used against MRAs from your side, and used by you once again in this video, is to falsely associate us with non-MRAs who have said something fucking stupid. You know, the perfect examples are Roosh V, Elliot Rodger, and that nutbag Peter Andrew Nolan copyrighted. When we are constantly associated with non-MRAs, or just any troll, or anyone who a feminist dislikes or disagrees with. To sum this up perfectly, I'll show you a comment recently made by McKenna. And full credit to McKenna for changing her attitude and acknowledging that she was wrong in the past. But it does perfectly sum up people on your side, Garrett, who just associate anyone they dislike or anyone who disagrees with them as an MRA. And I'm not talking about just people in the YouTube comment section or on Twitter or Facebook or fucking Tumblr. I'm talking about the mainstream media here. The fucking mainstream media. This is what we constantly get, this false association bullshit. And you have the fucking nerve to say that, oh, no, you're not really talking about feminism, you're talking about the radfems, and you guys are at fault for not pointing that out. Absolutely fucking amazing that you have the balls to make that argument. Now, you know, if you're actually criticising your side for doing it and not doing it yourself, then maybe you would have somewhat of a point. Maybe you could argue that point. You'd still be wrong, by the way, but maybe you'd have more credibility when you actually do it. But to make that fucking argument, considering the attitudes and the behaviour of the vast majority of feminists on your side who are vocal about men's rights activists, just fucking amazing, mate. It's unbelievable. But I tell you what, let's be fair and let's look at Garrett's claim. Should we just be criticising the radfems? Is only the radfems the problem? It's just those pesky radfems who are making these arguments and against men's rights and stopping meetings and all the rest. Well, firstly, I'd like to know how Garrett knows that the protesters at the University of Toronto, or any of the other protests at any other university, have just been radfems. Do you know for a fact that they identify as radfems? Do you know for a fact that they buy into the radical feminist ideology as opposed to mainstream feminism? My guess would be that in most cases they're gender studies students. There's no doubt that the radical element of feminism has a big influence on university campuses. I would agree with that, and that is a problem. I don't really hear the mainstream feminists criticising that, strangely. I mean, even here in Melbourne we had Sheila Jeffries, a well-known transphobe, as part of Melbourne University for a very long time. She's a radical feminist. Don't really hear a lot of feminists complaining about it. And if these radical feminists do have an influence on, say, gender studies courses, for example, and the students who attend them, then shouldn't your side, the mainstream feminist movement, be critical of that, just like we are? But instead we find you supporting gender studies. And of course this also ignores the fact that the attitudes and ideology that we criticise, and that Garrett is trying to blame on radical feminists, is actually part of the mainstream media. The loudest and most vocal feminists with the most influence and the most power, those in the media who have massive readerships. Are you really suggesting, Garrett, that they're all radical feminists? Now, I know one or two of them actually. Glosswitch definitely is a radfem, and I've pointed that out before. But I don't see you guys speaking up against it. I actually see you supporting these people in the media. I see your side citing people like We Hunted the Mammoth all the time. Good old Dave Futrell, because he supports your preconceived stereotypes of us. Mind you, Dave Futrell actually supported those protesters at the University of Toronto. Does that make him a radfem, I wonder? Or just a supporter of radical feminism? And the fact that most feminists use him as a citation, does that make them radfems as well, Garrett, I wonder? Or just supporters of a radfem? Of course, the main fault in Garrett's argument here, apart from, it's virtually impossible in a lot of cases to determine if someone is a radical feminist unless they come out and say it, or they directly preach some kind of a radical feminist ideology. Apart from that flaw, the main flaw in his argument is that radical feminists and mainstream feminism have many things in common, many ideologies in common. They both believe in rape culture, they both believe in toxic masculinity, and they both believe in patriarchy theory. Now, it wouldn't make sense for me to have an issue with radical feminists because they believe in these three things, for example, but not to have an issue with mainstream feminism, which also believes in these things. Now, it is true the mainstream may be a bit more watered down and not as extreme, but the foundation is still there. Mainstream feminism still sees masculinity as toxic, right? Oh, but we should just ignore that and just focus on the radfems. Is that your argument, Garrett? I'm fucking telling you, mate. Massive fucking balls. Fucking massive balls. That's the only thing I can think of, mate.
If not more, because they hurt our brand too. Just not as much as the toxic MRA hurts the men's rights movement brand.
What you mean here is the stereotype of the toxic MRA, which is built on false association, misquotes, and straw men. Isn't that right, Garrett? Now, once again, let me stress, I do not mind fair criticism of our movement. In fact, I welcome it. I ask people on your side, or neutral people, to make fair criticism of us. If one of our members, or the group in general, starts preaching something stupid, then we need a counterbalance, if you want to put it that way, a counterbalance to bring it to our attention, to point it out to us. I don't want to live in an echo chamber where only the voices similar to my own and opinions similar to my own are the only ones I hear. That's bullshit. So yeah, I welcome fair criticism. And to be honest, I've been critical of MRAs myself when I think they've said something stupid. In my last response to you, I was critical of an article by Angry Harry. And in the past, I've been critical of Paul Elam. Now, it's not to say that I think everything he has said is wrong, but there are some clear examples which deserve criticism. Fair criticism. What is not fair criticism, though, is false stereotypes, false associations, things taken out of context, and straight out fucking bullshit, which is what we normally get from your side.
The way that men's rights activists talk about this stuff, they just say feminists did it. They don't make a distinction between feminists and radical feminists.
So you mean like when feminists say MRA, but what they actually mean is the manosphere, right? Because they're exactly the same thing, right? Everyone in the manosphere is an MRA? Isn't that what we constantly fucking hear from your side? Oh, come on, Garrett. Seriously, mate. And let's be honest here, right? Mainstream feminism and radical feminism have far more in common than the various groups within the manosphere. Alright, radfems and mainstream feminists have a lot more in common than, say, pickup artists and men's rights activists. Yet, pickup artists are constantly fucking used as examples of MRAs to demonise us. Fucking unbelievable. Now, I don't hear you criticising your side for doing this, Garrett. Maybe you have, and maybe I've missed it. If that's the case, by all means, bring it to my attention and I will acknowledge it in a future video. No problem. If you have been criticising your own side for doing worse than what you're accusing us of, I will give you credit for it. But if you haven't, you are a fucking hypocrite. You are a fucking massive hypocrite. Especially when you were guilty of that very thing in this video. But, you know, I'm saving that till the end.
Now, the reason that those two are different terms, and that the reason the word radical is in there, is because they're not the same group. Radfems use tactics and have goals that does not reflect mainstream feminism.
Yet both mainstream feminists and radical feminists believe in patriarchy theory, rape culture, and toxic masculinity. And I'm using those terms as commonly defined by feminists. These are what we have issues with. These are the things that we disagree on. So it doesn't really matter if radfems and mainstream feminism disagree over other things, which you're about to mention some of them in a minute. That's irrelevant if we disagree with you guys over these basic things which have become the cornerstone of modern mainstream feminism. There are very few mainstream feminists out there, vocal, prominent mainstream feminists, who don't believe in patriarchy theory, rape culture, or toxic masculinity. You can't argue that only radfems believe in this, because that's simply not reality. And I'm assuming you believe in these things as well, Garrett. These ideologies are what I have a problem with. These ideologies are what the men's rights movement has a problem with. This stuff you're saying about radical feminism, that's just an attempt to distract from the real issues.
That's why there's an R in the acronym TERF and the acronym SWERF. And for those that don't know, that's Transgender Exclusionary Radical Feminist and Sex Worker Exclusionary Radical Feminist.
And I have to say, this is a particular thing that I and many other MRAs agree with mainstream feminists on. I fully support trans rights. This is something mainstream feminists and myself fully agree on. There are a number of things which we agree on, and this is one of them. You know, if you were to put myself, Garrett, and a radfem like, say, Sale Polani, who these days is better known as Man Cheese, if you were to put the three of us in a room together, and the topic that we were to debate was trans rights, Garrett and I would find ourselves on the same side, disagreeing with Sale Polani, Man Cheese, or whatever fucking name she's using this week. We would both agree that she is wrong and she is a bigot and needs to be criticised for her bullshit arguments. However, if we had the exact same scenario and the topic of toxic masculinity was brought up, I think Garrett and Man Cheese would find themselves on the same side, and I would be the one arguing against them. So once again, let me stress, the issues we have with feminism is not just the radical aspects, it's the mainstream. These ideologies that we have issues with are part of the mainstream. That is the problem. And trying to use radical feminists as a shield, Garrett, is not going to work. And you know, the really, really funny part of all this is that we have mainstream feminists who claim that MRAs are against trans rights because we're not mainstream feminists. Therefore, all those nasty MRAs, the boogeyman of the MRAs, has to be against trans rights, right? Even though they never bother actually asking us, they just assume and then proceed to demonise us. While at the same time we have radical feminist lunatics who assume that trans rights is somehow a men's rights plot. They actually go around calling feminists who are against men's rights activism, the radicals, the radfems, refer to those feminists as MRAs because they disagree with what the radfems believe in. Do you not see how they're using the term MRA to label anyone who they fucking disagree with? Fucking hell, Garrett. And you actually have the nerve to criticise us for not using the label radfem when criticising feminism. And this shit is going on. Fucking hell. Unbelievable, mate.
Now, the reason the word radical is in those acronyms is because those views haven't represented anywhere near close to mainstream feminism for 20 plus years.
And you'd be 100% correct if the issue was trans rights. Okay? If our big argument against feminism was that they're anti-trans, then you'd be right to point out that only the radfems are anti-trans. And if we ever criticise feminism for being anti-trans or anti-trans rights, then you are correct. We should label those feminists radical feminists. That is a fair point. But you can't claim that mainstream feminism and radical feminism don't have, once again, I'm about to say it, patriarchy theory, rape culture, and toxic masculinity in common. Those three ideologies, both mainstream and radical feminists have in common. That's what our issue is with. That's why we criticise both the mainstream and the radical variety. That simple, mate.
Just a quick side note here. The MRA I was arguing with on Twitter accused me of a no true Scotsman fallacy by making the distinction between feminists and radfems. I wasn't trying to claim that radfems aren't real feminists. However, making a distinction between the mainstream and the fringes that are basically extremists is critically important in any group. And before anyone accuses me of failing to make the same distinction between anti-feminist bigoted MRAs and those who are really primarily focused on activism...
Okay, so you're assuming that if someone disagrees with feminism, then therefore they're a bigot, right? Because disagreeing with rape culture, patriarchy theory, and toxic masculinity, those three ideologies, for example, somehow means that you hate women? Really? Really, Garrett? That's the argument that you're going with here. That's what you're trying to sell us. Is it? Really? Unbelievable.
Get your ears checked. I have clearly made that distinction several times, and in fact, that is the whole point of this video. If I didn't think the latter category existed, I wouldn't have made this video. There'd be no point.
Yes, but unfortunately, as I've said and shown numerous times in this video so far, most people on your side, when discussing MRAs, don't happen to distinguish us from anyone in the manosphere, or anyone they dislike, for that matter. I mean, have a look at this, for example.
After the event, I went to Twitter to see what happened after I left, and two things really surprised me. One, according to feminists at this event, these guys are MRAs. Never mind if the radical Christians didn't talk about male bodily integrity or father's rights. They are MRAs because everyone who isn't pro-feminist is just another men's rights advocate.
So apparently some fundamentalist Christians turn up at a slut walk, and that somehow makes them MRAs. I mean, of course it does, right? I mean, fucking hell. Seriously, Garrett. This is what comes from your side, mate. This is what we put up with all the fucking time. And you wonder why we have a problem with feminism? Seriously? when all your side does is mislabel and lie and deceive. When all your side does is create fucking straw men to try to fight. Fucking hell, mate. And you actually have the nerve to criticise us because we don't use the term radfem for anyone who disagrees with us. Oh, fucking hell, mate. Seriously.
But when men's rights activists just say feminists disrupted a men's rights conference, that pisses mainstream feminists off because it's like you're just completely missing that really key distinction. You know, it alienates us from you and causes this whole gender culture war thing that's going on now.
No, Garrett. What's doing that is the constant attacks on males and masculinity as something faulty or toxic or wrong. When your side constantly portrays males and masculinity as the problem, as the fault for everything in the fucking world, and feminism is the only solution. And of course, all women everywhere are always innocent victims who never have any responsibility for their own actions. When your side does this, that's what causes the fucking gender wars. That's what causes a separation between our two sides. That's what prevents us from working together on more issues. It really is that simple. Yet your side has the nerve to call us bigots because we happen to disagree with that type of feminist ideology. Well done. Well done, feminism.
If you look at the whole false rape accusation epidemic myth that some MRAs love to drone on about, that is the perfect example of how the MRM alienates feminists, people who have experience successfully fighting for gender-specific causes and could be potentially of great assistance to MRAs. They go on about this and say stuff like 90% of rape accusations are false, or date rape is just bad sex. And for anyone about to jump in with Thunderfoot isn't an MRA, he's made many videos discussing their talking points and focusing on men's rights causes, so his lack of willingness to identify as an MRA outright just goes to illustrate my point about the label being poisonous. Anyway, back to what I was saying.
Now, I've dealt with the false rape claim section of that clip extensively in my last response video to Garrett. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. But as for Thunderfoot being an MRA, really? Has Thunderfoot really made videos discussing our talking points and discussing our issues? It's news to me. I mean, I watched Thunderfoot's videos and I don't recall one on the men's rights movement. I do, however, happen to recall many anti-feminist videos. And the reason why he started making anti-feminist videos, I think there was two reasons. The first one is the influx of feminism into the atheist movement, and also Anita Sarkeesian's dishonest representation of video games. Thunderfoot being both an atheist and part of the atheist community, and a fan of video games, responded. And as you pointed out, since then he's talked about such things as rape culture. However, this does not make him an MRA. Very strange argument to make, Garrett, that someone who is an anti-feminist should automatically be an MRA, considering earlier in your very video you did say...
And before anyone accuses me of failing to make the same distinction between anti-feminist bigoted MRAs and those who are really primarily focused on activism, get your ears checked. I have clearly made that distinction several times, and in fact, that is the whole point of this video. If I didn't think the latter category existed, I wouldn't have made this video. There'd be no point.
So, Garrett admits that there is a difference between someone who is a men's rights activist and someone who is an anti-feminist. He clearly knows that the two terms are not synonymous. They don't mean the same thing. The criteria for being a men's rights activist is not also being an anti-feminist. The two terms are not the same. He clearly knows this, yet he goes on to use an anti-feminist as an example of a men's rights activist. An anti-feminist who isn't a men's rights activist and does not advocate for the rights of men. Do you not see the problem with this, Garrett? And unfortunately, this is all too common on Garrett's side of the fence. For example, let's look at this guy who is about to call Sargon an MRA.
So it's that kind of callousness that leads us to the popular hashtag #KillAllMen.
Jokes at the expense of men. It's the outrage at this kind of thing that shows how the MRA are merely a reactionary movement against feminism. It doesn't have any ideals of its own rather than to oppose what feminism stands for. It's kind of like creationism in that sense.
So he takes someone who doesn't advocate for the rights of men and who doesn't identify as a men's rights activist, and then uses him as an example, as the perfect example of how MRAs don't advocate for the rights of men. Do you know why Sargon's not an MRA? Because he doesn't fucking advocate for the rights of men, you moron. do you not get that? But because Sargon is an anti-feminist, well, that must mean he's a typical MRA, because the two terms are exactly the same, right? I really don't understand why your side has such a big issue in understanding that not everyone who is an anti-feminist is an MRA. You can be an anti-feminist and not interested in the rights of men. But for some reason, you guys just can't understand this. Look, let me give you an analogy which might make this a bit easier to understand. Now, I think we can all agree that the vast majority of Americans are in fact white, correct? However, this does not mean that all Americans are white, or that all white people are in fact American. And the reason for this is because white and American are not synonymous. Yes, there is overlap. Yes, there are some Americans who are white and some whites who are American, but they don't mean the same fucking thing. They are not synonymous. Not everyone who is white is also American, and not everyone who is American is also white. Now, I'm assuming that you can understand this, Garrett, and that people on your side can understand it, because it's pretty simple and straightforward. Yet, for some reason, you guys can't understand the exact same thing concerning anti-feminism and men's rights activism. It's very strange that you insist that the two words are synonymous when they're not. The vast majority of anti-feminists are not MRAs. The vast majority of anti-feminists who actively speak out against feminism do not advocate for the rights of men. They're not interested in advocating for the rights of men. And in fact, some of them who are on the right end of the political spectrum actively fight against the things that we fight for. We're not in favour of gender roles where women are stuck in the kitchen or men are stuck with the role of provider-protector, but a lot of the extreme right-wingers want to go back to that, the 1950s mentality. We don't have that in common with them. Rush V is an anti-feminist. That's something we have in common, but our type of anti-feminism isn't exactly the same. We agree that the demonisation of men is wrong. We agree that things like patriarchy theory and rape culture and toxic masculinity are wrong. But Rush has clearly stated he wants to go back to that 1950s mentality. We don't. And he doesn't advocate for the rights of men. He's a pickup artist. Pickup artists are interested in getting laid. His self-value is based on how much pussy he gets. That's not men's rights activism. That's not a human rights issue. Why is it that your side can't fucking understand this, Garrett? Can you answer that question, please? And the most recent thing we're getting from your side is the MRA not an MRA bullshit. Now, this comes about when your side are insisting that someone's an MRA because, well, you don't like their opinion, or they're an anti-feminist, or even just a non-feminist. Or in some cases, they're actually a feminist but of a different brand of feminism. I've actually seen that before. But you insist that they're an MRA because, right? They're not advocating for the rights of men, but somehow magically, according to you guys, they're an MRA. And when someone points out that they're not a fucking MRA, the reaction from your side is to make fun of it by saying, oh, he's a MRA / not an MRA. Or to say that, oh, well, they're actually an MRA, but they're afraid to label themselves as an MRA because of the toxic nature of men's rights activism. Fucking bullshit. Fucking bullshit. I recently saw this claim from James Fell that idiot fucking fitness guru guy who's constantly promoting feminism, who claims that because of people like himself, that Rushvi is no longer claiming to be an MRA. He never fucking has claimed to be an MRA. For years, he's been talking shit about us. He's been speaking out against us. He's been talking down the men's rights movement and declaring that he's not a part of it. But because we're calling you out, because we're shining that bright spotlight on your bullshit, the argument has now shifted to, oh, well, he's really an MRA, but he's just ashamed to admit it. Fucking bullshit. Cut out the bullshit, Garrett. Seriously, if you want to meet us in the middle ground, if you want a serious conversation, right, you want to cut out the fighting and the constant bickering, and you want both sides, MRAs and feminists, to work together to actually deal with these things. And if you want to get rid of the anti-feminists, you want to decrease the number of anti-feminists, there's a number of ways you can actually do that. The first is to call out your side when they make these false associations. To call out bullshit. And to not do it yourself, mate. Because as long as you do this, as long as you use these dishonest fucking tactics, we are going to be fighting against you. How can we not? When you're fucking demonizing us. When you're fucking lying about us. Secondly, it would be nice if you cut out the anti-male bullshit on your side. And I'm not talking about just a handful of people on Tumblr or Twitter or whatever, making fucking all males rapist type comments. I'm not talking about that bullshit, although obviously that bullshit needs to stop as well. I'm talking about all the anti-male bullshit at the heart of feminism. Perfect example, toxic masculinity. You know the type of thing, where males are constantly considered the evildoers and females are constantly considered their innocent victims. I mean, you talk about fucking gender stereotypes, you've got it right there, mate. You've got the perfect example right there. And this is actively promoted by your side. It's the fucking cornerstone of your side. How can we work with you when you demonize us? When you say that we're born fucking evil because we're male? Fucking hell, mate. It's amazing, this shit. I remember years ago when I first got into the whole debate between men's rights and feminism, I was having a discussion with someone in the comments section of YouTube. And she said that all the world's evils had basically been committed by men, all the war crimes had been committed by men, and that women had never done anything like that whatsoever. So I put out Pauline Niramasahuko, who was convicted of genocide in the Rwandan incident. She was the Minister of Family Welfare and the Advancement of Women, by the way. I wonder if she was a feminist. Possibly. But I pointed out that Pauline was convicted of genocide, and do you know what reaction I got from this particular feminist? She said, well, it's not her fault. She did what she did because she was part of the male system. She was just acting like a male. Fucking fantastic. So when men do something wrong, right, it's because they're male. But when a woman does something wrong, well, it's not really her fucking fault, is it? It's because of a male somewhere. Or it's because of society in general. Fucking bullshit. That's not equality, mate. When someone does something wrong, we need to judge them on their actions, not based on their fucking gender. So yeah, I do have a problem with toxic masculinity and other bullshit like that at the very fucking heart of feminism. It has nothing to do with women's rights and the advancement of women, and it has everything to do with shifting all the fucking blame in the world towards males and masculinity. And you actually think that I'm going to support something like that? No fucking way, mate. Thirdly, you could actually get your side to acknowledge that males have issues too. Now, I know this is becoming more common on your side, and I think this is a good thing. And I actually think it's because we're gaining ground on our side. I've been in this movement for about 3 years now, and when I first got in, the constant thing I heard was, men don't have issues, men have all the rights and all the power and all the privilege. It's only women who have issues. And then it shifted to, yes, men do actually have issues, but the men's rights movement isn't the right movement to deal with it. The men's rights movement is bad. We need feminism to deal with men's issues. And now it's shifted once again, which is where we arrive at your video, where we get, well, yes, men do have issues, and yes, there is a need for a men's rights movement. And we just need to stop the men's rights movement being anti-feminist. Well, Garrett, there is a very good reason why we're anti-feminist. I've given you tons of examples in this video. Now, if you want to be one of those good feminists and support men's rights and men's issues and be actually about equality, and you want to be interested in, you know, helping women as well, that's fine. I've got no issue with that. I will support you if you are pro women's rights but not anti-men. And if you actually criticize your side for the shit that I've shown in this video, fantastic, you will get my support. But if you're going to promote anti-male bullshit, or you're going to ignore the fucking assholes on your side who are constantly falsely associating us with people who aren't part of our movement, or spreading lies about us, or demonizing us, or fucking spreading straw men, if you want to just ignore them while criticizing us for not using the term radfem more often, then yeah, you're part of the problem, mate. That fucking simple.
But one, I'm not an MRA. I've never called myself an MRA. I don't claim to be an MRA. And for sure as hell, I'm not a leader of any MRAs. Right?
According to the media, I run the biggest men's rights site on the internet. So Returning Kings, for the past year, they keep saying that Returning Kings is a men's rights site. I've come out to say it's not. And look, I have criticized men's rights. I've said don't practice it, but they're still doing it.
I don't label myself anything, right? Apart from a manner, I'm going to label myself a manner because I define the manifesto, so which is a manner as a real man. So I don't label myself an MRA. I don't label myself a father's rights activist. I don't label myself a MGTOW. And anybody who wants to label me is free to label me, but they label me falsely, and with me saying that I don't label myself.
So I'm at the point where, hey, maybe I should just lead men's rights because the media is already saying it. Yeah. But instead, that was a joke, of course, because I know people are going to get angry at that.
Now then you might ask, well, why wouldn't you label yourself MGTOW? And my answer to that is, most MGTOWs I talk to are a bigger bunch of pussies and as big a bunch of liars and hypocrites as the MRAs, as the father's rights activists, and as the feminists are.
So I'd completed the video track for the video that you've just finished watching, and I think I was about halfway through doing all the overlays, and trust me, there was a lot of overlays to do in this video. I'm officially sick of doing overlays. But anyway, I think I was about halfway through doing all the overlays when I noticed that Garrett had put up a new video. I actually found it on the Skeptic Feminist channel, and Garrett's video is called What We Don't Like Within Feminism. Now I have to give Garrett credit for many of the points he makes in this video, and I do think some of them are a little bit, to use a feminist term, problematic though. I'm not going to do an extensive commentary on this video because I've still got part of the video I've been criticising to get through, as well as another video of Garrett's to get through, and I don't want to add a third one to the list. But I have included, for fairness, some aspects of Garrett's latest video in which he criticises feminism. I have edited down his video, though. I haven't included the entire thing. This is for both time and relevancy. But of course the link to his entire video is below, as always, and I'd recommend that you go and watch it. And as always, make up your own mind. I do think Garrett is headed in the right direction, or at least pointed in the right direction, but I do think there are some problems still there. So without any further delay, take it away, Garrett.
Hello. In this video, I'm going to be discussing some things within the feminist movement that I strongly dislike and or disagree with. These things are not all on the same level in terms of my opinions towards them. I view some of them as being a lot more problematic than others. Which is which will be made clear in my description of each. I need to point out that these are just my opinions, and my opinions are subject to change based on new information. So if anyone wants to make a case in favor of these things, feel free to do so in the comments. Having said that, there are two that I am not interested in hearing any defense of, because they are based in bigotry. By the end of the video, there should be no doubt or confusion as to which two I'm talking about. In this category, I'll be looking at 4 types of exclusionary attitudes that some feminists demonstrate. It should be noted, though, that in all these cases, these groups are a small minority within feminism as it is today, though they were all more common in the past. Intersectionality has done wonders in reducing the influences of these things, which has been a very positive thing for the movement, as I will explain in each case. This one I have mixed feelings about. I completely understand this stance and am somewhat sympathetic to it, but my opposition to it is again purely based on pragmatism. On the one hand, I think this is a legitimate position to have as a feminist, but on the other hand, I think it hurts the movement a lot. It is completely true that as a man, I will never be able to fully and completely understand the female experience. And this does have some effect on my approach to feminism. It has to, I get that. And I also understand that this is not appropriately factored in by some, if not many, male feminists, leading them to sometimes be condescending and rely on mansplaining, opinions that do not reflect the realities of the female experience, and the ridiculous idea that a position based purely on information from books and studies can compete with a position based both on books and studies and lived experience. However, all of that is best combated by trying to improve the ways of thinking of male feminists, not by excluding them. The vast majority of male feminists mean well and have good intentions. Now, that doesn't mean they don't put their foot in it on occasion and say things that do not ring true for women, but it does suggest that many who do this can be reasoned with and shown the error of their ways. That doesn't apply to all of them, of course. Obviously, there are some to whom mansplaining is just a way of life. But it is my sincere belief that we can make most of the men within the feminist movement that do often communicate with female feminists in a patronizing way see the light and sort their shit out. In the spirit of that, to reiterate what I said when Christy Winters interviewed me, I am very wary of engaging in these sorts of behaviors myself, and I want people to call me out if I ever do. The very idea of me being seen as a mansplaining, condescending asshole honestly makes me shudder and is of great concern to me. So if you see me being like that, before you consider saying fuck you to my channel, I implore you to tell me about it first and judge me based on how I respond to that information, rather than judging me based on the initial problematic behavior that I may have engaged in. And I would extend that to how we should approach all male feminists. If they reply to that kind of criticism with a dismissive disregard for the lived experience of women, fuck them. And fuck me too if I ever become like that. Before moving on, I want to elaborate on what I said about excluding men from feminism hurting the movement. I say this because I've studied a lot of activist movements, and generally speaking, they are negatively affected in the eyes of the majority of people by excluding anyone based on factors they cannot control. Whether or not this reaction is fair is not really important. What matters is this is the perception of most people. Inclusive approaches to activism work better than exclusionary approaches. They increase the likelihood of achieving activist goals. I, just like any feminist, care greatly about the actual achievement of the goals of the brand of feminism that I favor. That's the whole reason I am a feminist, rather than a feminist ally or a pro-feminist, whatever you want to call it. I am passionate about the achievement of third-wave intersectional goals, and as such, I am in favor of things that make those goals more likely to be achieved, and not in favor of things that make them less likely. It's all about pragmatism. But as I said, on this one, I completely understand the opposing stance, and I'm not going to tell anyone that this stance is not legitimate. It is a perfectly reasonable and understandable stance to take. But it is equally reasonable to be inclusive to men being part of feminism as well. especially since the inclusive approach generates better results for the movement. That's all I'm saying. If you disagree, let me know in the comments. I would be very interested to hear your reasoning. Now, there is one branch of male exclusionary attitudes that I absolutely cannot abide in any way, shape, or form. And that is the exclusion of trans women. TERFs do not view trans women as legitimate feminists, because they view them as not being real women. They view them as still being men. These people are just as reprehensible as those within white feminism, and together these two groups are the worst scum within the feminist movement. And as a side note, often they're the same people. I don't have much to say on this topic because, frankly, anyone who views trans women as still being men is not worth my time to speak to. So, I'm not even going to bother trying to make a case against these people. To me, that would be like taking the time to make a case against overt racists. Racism is bad. For anyone who isn't a scumbag, that is all that needs to be said. It is exactly the same for trans exclusionary radfems. Their awfulness and bigotry speaks for itself. Fuck TERFs, that is all. One of the things I sometimes see feminists engaging in that really bothers me is when they make sweeping negative statements about huge, broad groups of people on the basis of things they cannot control. Here are the three main examples I see of this, by which I mean expressing these sentiments in their own words, not using this exact phrasing. The middle one I see especially often. I once got dogpiled on Twitter for objecting to a trans person saying this. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand that the vast majority of times this happens, the person doesn't actually hold these views. They're usually venting due to a negative experience they just had. I get that. I know that when most female feminists say the first one, they're not actually man-haters, they are just expressing frustration about something a man or a group of men just said or did.
Now, I can't help but jump in here and leave a comment, because I find this very interesting. You see, this is a perfect example of a double standard. As an MRA, and I think I can speak for all MRAs on this point, if we criticise an individual woman for what she has said or done, complete with examples and evidence and all the rest of it, we will be accused of being a misogynist. We will be told that we hate all women. We hate all women throughout history. We even hate the women who haven't been born yet. We just hate women everywhere, because how dare we criticise one individual woman for something she has said or done? Because, you know, it's not actually, we don't actually criticise her in their eyes. We just hate women in general. Yet here Garrett is saying that when a feminist comes out, a female feminist comes out and declares that she hates all men and that all men are bad, well, it's not really her fault, because she's just having a bad day, or she's had a bad experience or something like that. Yeah, sorry Garrett, but this is not equality. This is not treating men and women as equals, okay? We should be able to criticise individuals and give reasons why we criticise those individuals. Of course, that criticism should be based on something that person has said or done. We should be able to do this without being generalised as a misogynist and hating all women, because we dare to criticise an individual, even though we've criticised males for exactly the same thing, of course. Yet, sweeping generalisations about males and masculinity are just excused away, as if they're not really serious. But let's continue.
I realise that, I do. However, my gripe with these sorts of sentiments is that they make feminists look bad in the eyes of neutral people, and provide ammunition for anti-feminists to smear us with. When people see feminists saying these sorts of things, it hurts the movement, and I want the movement to thrive and succeed, so it makes complete sense to me to be against this sort of rhetoric, despite understanding the reality of it not really being about actual man-hating, cis-hating, white people-hating, etc., the overwhelming majority of the time. I'm familiar enough with the people I see expressing this stuff from time to time that I know that they don't really feel that way, because I see what they normally tweet and I interact with them, and I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on their worldviews. So my message here is, for anyone who's in a time of vulnerability, anger, frustration, or difficult circumstance, please reconsider this particular form of public venting. If you care about the feminist movement, just know that it makes us look bad and drives people away who otherwise might be interested in being part of the movement. Because many of the people who see feminists saying these things don't understand that context at all, and don't know that it is usually not a reflection of people's actual, sincerely held views. This is one thing that I really strongly dislike about social media, and in my experience, social justice advocates seem to engage in this more than any other group. They see someone saying something that appears objectionable and react in an instantaneous, ad hoc way, based primarily on emotion, without bothering to get context by checking the person's posting history. Of course, some of the time when this happens, the person does have a long history of saying similar things, but it seems to me that an equal amount of the time they don't, and the particular tweet, post, or comment they get dogpiled for is being misinterpreted, and the strong negative reaction is unwarranted and unfair. This is the sort of thing that can really damage people, and many of those people never intended to offend anyone and don't actually hold the views that they're being attacked for. There is a constructive way to approach those who cause unintentional offense to others, and dogpiling is basically the opposite of it. There are people out there who were once part of the feminist/social justice community and turned away from it after being unfairly dogpiled. So again, my objection to this is that it hurts the movement and makes us look really bad. Whenever I see people getting dogpiled, I always look into their social media presence as much as I can before judging them for the specific thing they are getting dogpiled for. I never take part in dogpiling myself, even when it is completely justified, because there are plenty of people out there not only willing to take part in it, but eager to do so. Hungry too, really. The main thing that made me understand how harmful this can be is when I read John Ronson's great book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed. I highly recommend it to anyone wanting to know more about the really dark and awful side of this kind of groupthink social media shaming. Link to the book's Amazon page in the description. There are a lot of really interesting and moving case studies of people being unfairly dogpiled in there, so it's worth a read to anyone who uses social media. And in today's world, let's face it, that's pretty much all of us. I'll also put a link to an excellent TED Talk by Ronson about the book, which is what prompted me to read it. Part of me felt that I should spend a long time on this one and get into a lot of detail about the importance of not doing this, but I decided to leave that for another video I am planning for the future, in which I discuss the core goals of mainstream third-wave feminism and why they are important, both to me personally and just in general. One of those core goals of the third wave is the dissolution of the harmful negative aspects of traditional gender norms, those being related to socio-cultural factors and not biological gender differences. Most feminists, both now and in the past, have viewed these things as something to fight against. But I have noticed a strong undercurrent within feminism that acts in counter to this and reinforces gender roles. Often it seems that feminists who do this are not doing it intentionally and are just being a bit momentarily careless or thoughtless. This one is so common that I myself have doubtlessly engaged in this type of thinking or behavior on occasion. So my main point here is that I want all feminists to try and be mindful of this, because our position on gender norms is undermined by any and all rhetoric that acts to reinforce them. So to give just one example, men showing their emotions should not be made fun of for doing so. Okay, well if I got anything wrong, or if you have anything to add to the discussion on any of these issues, feel free to leave a comment. Unless you're a TERF or a racist, in which case I invite you to crawl under a rock and die painfully. Thank you.
Bain66 is ignorant, he's a liar, and he's very possibly a CIA plant. So Bain66 is ignorant, he's a liar, and he's very possibly a CIA plant. So Bain66 is ignorant, he's a liar, and he's very possibly a CIA plant. So